Hey Philly, how do we solve our housing crisis, or make our city safer, or make sure our voice has more power than big money in politics? Find out November 14th and 15th at the Philadelphia Citizens 7th Annual Ideas We Should Steal Festival, presented by Comcast NBC Universal. Hear from change makers from across the country, like best-selling author Michael Eric Dyson, MSNBC's Ali Velshi, actress-activist Deborah Winger, and many more. Visit thephiladelphiacitizen.org/IWSS. Use code CitizenFriend for $10 off. That's thephiladelphiacitizen.org/IWSS. And remember, all great change started with one idea.
Today on CityCast Philly, voters in 7 swing states will make the final determination on who becomes the next president of the United States. Of those swing states, Pennsylvania has the most electoral votes and therefore the most power. And within Pennsylvania, the biggest share of those votes are right here in Philly. So how are those votes being counted? Can we trust how they're being counted? And will the rest of America and the candidates themselves believe in our process? We have just the person who knows the answers. City Commissioner Seth Bluestein, who runs our elections. It's Monday, November 4th. I'm Trenae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Commissioner Seth Bluestein, thanks for being here on CityCast Philly, and thank you for your service and making sure Election Day goes as smoothly as possible.
Thanks for having me. It's really good to be here with you.
Okay, you're at the Philadelphia Election Warehouse. What's it like right now?
We've been preparing this warehouse for this presidential election for 3.5 years now, and it is very busy. This is where we program all of our voting machines. It is where all of the mail ballots come back each day. And right now, sitting behind me, they are currently working on testing and programming the electronic poll books to get them ready for Election Day.
All right, you guys are super busy. So before we get into the process of voting and how it all works, can you just explain to us, what's your job like as one of the 3 members of the Board of Elections?
Yeah, so it's our job to oversee the entire voter registration and election process for the whole city. So I work with my 2 colleagues to oversee all of the staff. We have hundreds of employees. We have to recruit thousands of poll workers. So it is a very large responsibility that takes all year round work to do.
So Tuesday, November 5th, the big day. I'll walk into my polling place between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. I'll sign in, go behind the curtain, and vote. So then after that, where does my vote actually go?
Yeah, so when you vote in person at the polling place, you are being handed a paper ballot that will be placed inside of the voting machine. And then when you make your selection on the voting machine, it will print those selections on the paper ballot. You can review it. And when you hit vote, it will scan the paper ballot. So it saves the results on a USB drive, and we have the backup paper ballots. All of those materials end up coming back to our election warehouse at the end of the night, and they are picked up by police officers, so they are securely transported. And that's when we are able to put results on our website for people to be able to see the results starting to come in.
You mentioned that basically there's a paper verified way of my vote. My vote's also on a USB drive. There's a police escort to make sure that it's protected. Now, so far, how many people in Philly have already voted via mail-in ballots?
Yeah, we've already received back well over 100,000 mail ballots. So it is not as many people as 2020, but so far we're getting the ballots back in a pretty good clip.
Do you know who's winning?
No, we can't actually review the ballots prior to Election Day. So when we receive a mail ballot back to the warehouse, we will timestamp it so we know that it was received timely, and we will update the voter's record in the registration database so that they know we received their ballot. But then the ballots actually have to stay in a locked cage, and they can't be reviewed or opened until Election Day.
Interesting. And how long is it going to take to open all of those envelopes?
It does take a long time. I mean, if we receive back, when all said and done, maybe 200,000 ballots, each ballot is inside a secrecy envelope, which is inside the return envelope. which means we now have 600,000 pieces of paper that have to be handled in order to get that ballot reviewed and counted. So it will take a while to do that. And since we can't start until Election Day, it might take a day or two before we finish counting the bulk of those mail ballots.
Why can't you start opening them now? Why do you have to wait until Election Day?
Unfortunately, the Pennsylvania legislature did not change the law. When Act 77 was passed in 2019, which is what allows us to have no excuse vote by mail in Pennsylvania, the law explicitly said that we cannot start the process of reviewing those ballots called pre-canvassing until Election Day. And 43 other states across the country allow pre-canvassing prior to Election Day. And we're one of 7 that do not.
How long will it take to tally both the mail-in and the in-person Election Day votes? If things are as close as they seem in the presidential polls, maybe we shouldn't expect an outcome on Election Day or for a few days. What's the timeline here?
Yeah, the in-person votes are actually tabulated pretty quickly on election night because they are saved to the USB drive, which is what we use for the unofficial election night reporting. So that part's pretty quick. But if the margin of the election is as close as it was in 2016 or 2020, it is very possible we will not know the results on election night. And it's not our job as the commissioner's office to call elections. It's our job to count ballots. And then the networks or the AP will call the election based off of their statistical models. So whether or not they can do that mostly will depend on how close the election is.
Do you have enough staff in the office to do this work?
We do. We've hired hundreds of temporary employees who will work election week to make sure that we are working around the clock. Once we start at 7 a.m. on Election Day, we are going to go 24/7 until we finish getting those ballots counted.
There was an analysis by VoteBeat and Spotlight PA that found that Philadelphia County really lagged behind Allegheny County when it comes to counting those mail ballots back in November of 2022. And Philly processed about 5,000 ballots per hour, whereas Allegheny County was able to handle more than 12,000 ballots per hour. What improvements have been made with the way we count here in Philadelphia County? And can we handle these large amounts of ballots?
Yeah, it's such an important question because the window of time from when the polls close until that race is called, that's really the biggest window for mis and disinformation and harassment and threats. And what we saw in 2020 was all of that occurred in that window of time. So over the summer, the commissioner's office invested in additional equipment to open the envelopes, and we're hiring additional temporary employees. So we are going to invest in getting those ballots counted quicker. And that's not to say that we still shouldn't have pre-canvassing, because we should. And that doesn't mean that we will necessarily know the results on election night, because we don't know what the margin will be. But we are doing everything in our power to count the ballots quicker than we have in the past.
More on how voting works in Philly after the break.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. So much of your personal info is out of your control, like your insurance provider that has your social security number and your favorite retailer that has your payment details. If they get breached, your information, your identity, is vulnerable. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
What do Mattel, Banana Republic, ButcherBox, and Glossier all have in common? They power their businesses with Shopify. Shopify is the most innovative and scaled commerce platform on the planet that also happens to have the best converting checkout on the planet. And that's no industry secret. That's Shopify. Learn more at shopify.com/enterprise.
You already said you might not be able to count all the votes on election night. And there's this window of time where misinformation flourishes while you're counting the votes. So while you're tallying the vote, you can imagine that the media, social media, and there's going to be a political onslaught focused on Pennsylvania. focused on you. Is there something you're very worried about?
Yeah, we know that the world's attention is going to be on Philadelphia, just like it was in 2020. We are the most populous county in the largest swing state in the country. And when I was a deputy commissioner for 10 years, including during 2020, we saw the threats that came because of the vote counting process.
Were you at the Pennsylvania Convention Center during the 2020 election?
I was Al Schmitz, who is now the Secretary of the Commonwealth. I was his deputy commissioner when he was city commissioner in Philadelphia. And it was my responsibility to oversee a lot of the vote counting process at the Pennsylvania Convention Center. So we've been through this and we know what to expect. So we're prepared to deal with all types of possibilities and threats. And it's a really unfortunate part of the job that didn't used to be here. But we know how important it is to count our voters' votes. That is the job that we signed up to do, and we're going to make sure it's done correctly.
Commissioner, have you faced personal threats?
In 2020, when I was the deputy commissioner, I did. We had to have police protection outside of my house to protect my wife and kids while I was at the convention center counting ballots. Fortunately, we have not seen that level of animus this election so far. I'm cautiously optimistic that we will not have the same threats that we had 4 years ago. But like I said, we will be prepared in case it does happen.
I'm a mom of 2 children, and we have watched the debates this election season. So, we talk about these conversations about democracy and, I have to break it down what voting is to them. So how do you explain to your children, to your family, like the work that you do and how you kind of play into the process of American democracy here?
My kids are pretty young. I have three young kids ranging from 7 to 3 months. So it's a little bit easier because they're not necessarily aware of what's going on in the world as much. But my daughter, who's older, she understands that things are going to be a little bit weird during election week. And they certainly notice when I'm working very long hours and I'm not home. But we talk about what voting is, and we try to explain it's about how people collectively can make a choice. I use examples that are meaningful to them, as if they're able to choose what flavor ice cream, and they have to vote on that. Or the kids in school have to vote to decide what they're going to do for recess. So we try and make it accessible as much as we can.
Now, I'm just thinking back to 2020. What happens this time around if Republican candidate, our former President Donald Trump, loses and he doesn't accept the outcome of the election like what happened in 2020? What will happen in Philly?
Well, in Philadelphia, we are very fortunate to have a bipartisan board of elections. That is, all 3 of us are committed to doing our jobs well and to counting all of our voters' votes. So in Philadelphia, the canvass period lasts 2 weeks. By law, it always does. So from election day through the end of the canvass until we certify the election, we are going to make sure that every single eligible ballot gets counted. And it's our job, essentially as the referees of the election, to count those votes regardless of the outcome. So whether former President Trump wins or whether Vice President Harris wins, our job is to make sure that the ballots are being counted and get counted accurately. And that's what we will make sure happens no matter what.
There was an article in the Enquirer about how the feds charged a man in Roxborough with federal crimes after he said he was going to kill and skin a campaign operative who was looking for volunteers. I mean, are you concerned about violence on Election Day or in the days after, like during this counting process?
In my experience, I haven't seen threats of violence at polling places or anywhere that would impact voters. I want people to know that voting is safe in Philadelphia, that we work with our law enforcement partners, the district attorney's office, state and federal partners to make sure that you are able to vote in person or by mail and vote securely and safely. If the election is very close and there's a very large window of time where we don't know the results, There is that risk of threats and violence, threats of violence at the warehouse where we'll be counting those votes. And that's why we have put a lot of security around the warehouse, and we will work with Philadelphia police to make sure that all of the election workers who are counting the ballots are safe.
Commissioner, you said that voting is safe in Philly. Is voting accurate? And how often is there voter fraud in Philly? Is it common?
Yeah, I think those are two separate questions. So I'll take the first one, which is, are the results accurate? And they are. And here's how we know that. Prior to each election, we do what's called logic and accuracy testing. That is when we test every single piece of equipment to make sure that it is working correctly.
Okay.
After the election, we conduct 2 audits of the ballots to ensure that the paper ballots, which are the records of how the votes were cast from each voter, match what the tabulation says that they said. So we're able to do those audits and confirm that the results are accurate. So I have complete confidence in the results being accurate in Philadelphia. So as far as it goes related to voter fraud, one side of the aisle will say there's widespread voter fraud. Another side of the aisle will say there's no voter fraud whatsoever. And while the truth is not somewhere in the middle, voter fraud does exist. It is extremely rare. And when it does happen, we find out about it and we investigate it, and then we refer it for further prosecution. So in my time in the commissioner's office, I've been here for 13 years now. We have found a few dozen cases. Usually they occur when it is a local race, it is a small number of votes, and we are able to identify it. And then we have gotten a number of guilty pleas from people who have committed voter fraud. One example is an individual last year who voted in Montgomery County and Philadelphia. So this individual voted more than once, and we found that, and we were able to put a stop to it.
What else keeps you up at night as a city commissioner?
Elections are a human-run endeavor. It is a complex logistical process that takes a very long time to plan, and it's essentially planning 1,700 different weddings that all occur on the same day. Right? we have 1,700 different locations across the city where people can go vote. And you have hundreds of people going to each location, and you have to make sure that every single one is operating correctly. So my biggest concern is when normal human things happen, the judge of elections shows up late because they overslept, or there was a flood in the basement of the rec center and the electric was out. These are normal things that happen. And what I am concerned about is when they will get misconstrued as if they are something nefarious, because our election workers are all working extremely hard. Democrats, Republicans, independents, every single person who is working on election day to help Philadelphians vote cares deeply about the job that they're doing. And if mistakes happen, we have to correct them. But we want to make sure that everybody who's listening is confident that our elections are being run well and that they can have trust in the ultimate results when we know the result at the end of the counting process.
In the journalism world, we stay up late. We're watching the results. We're eating pizza and soda. We're drinking coffee. I mean, I had about 2 cups last year. What does election night look like for the city commissioners? Well,
when the polls close at 8 p.m., we still have a lot of work to do. The poll workers are waiting for those police officers to come to pick up the materials and the ballots and bring them back to us. We are still counting mail ballots because we're going to do that around the clock. We have to make sure that all of our employees get home safely. And then we're just going to continue counting those votes until we have completely received everything and we have everything counted and we can certify the election.
We've been talking about low voter turnout when it comes to some local races, but this is a presidential election. So historically, more people come out and vote. But from your perspective, what challenges do you see from people getting to the polls? Is it that people don't feel connected to the process, or are there maybe physical barriers that we don't know about?
Yeah, it's a good question because there may be physical barriers that I don't know about. I don't want to dismiss anybody's individual challenges. But voting in Philadelphia has never been easier. We are making it as accessible as possible for Philadelphians to have their voice heard. We have opened 11 satellite election offices around the city so that Philadelphians can go to an office in their neighborhood, request a ballot, submit their ballot at the drop box there, get their questions answered, make sure that their registration status is updated. We have, like I said, 1,700 precincts. There are more than 700 buildings around the city where they can go vote in person. Most people only have to walk a couple blocks to get to their polling place. So we want to make voting as easy as possible. And unfortunately, even in a presidential election, that means based off of historical trends, we may only see 2/3 of the registered voters come out and vote, which is just not enough. As in municipal elections, I mean, that might go down to 17% turnout. Mm-hmm. So we want to have every single registered Philadelphian come out and vote and participate.
Commissioner Seth Bluestein, thank you so much for being here on CityCast Philly. And thank you for your service for making sure Election Day goes as smooth as possible.
Thanks, Trenae. It was great being here with you.
That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about how voting works in Philly, tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.